Had the EMT or the paramedic been educated to recognize my symptoms as possible stroke symptoms, I could have been taken by ambulance to a specialized cardiovascular unit in Seattle, which was only about 90 minutes away, and had proper treatment.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 156 of the Strokecast. Doing the right thing is sometimes just not enough. This week's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. And by the fine folks at Like-Minded. To find out if Like-Minded can help you live your best post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/like-minded. Olga and her husband were on the road trip of a lifetime. During their stop in the Pacific Northwest corner of the U.S., Olga thought she was having a stroke. So they did the right thing. They called 911 for an ambulance, which is exactly what anyone who might be experiencing a stroke should do. We say it all the time. Time is brain. Call that ambulance ASAP, as soon as possible. Because prompt treatment saves lives and reduces the chances of major disability. The EMTs that they met said she wasn't having a stroke. The ambulance crew said she wasn't having a stroke. The doctors at the ER said, yeah, she's probably not having a stroke. The window for TPA closed, and of course, Olga was having a stroke. This is her journey. So now, let's meet Olga. Olga, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
What was your life like leading up to your stroke? I mean, you seemed like you were having quite a few adventures.
I've always been a very active person. I worked full time while raising 3 kids. I've always been a hiker. I bicycled, canoed, played tennis. I also practice extreme gardening. That's how a lot of people know me. We have a few acres, and I have 45 permanent raised beds. I grow a lot of our own food. You know, I've always eaten a plant-based diet, usually organic. My husband and I, we do all our own work around here. We do our own landscaping, house cleaning, tile laying. I'm of normal body weight, normal blood pressure, normal cholesterol, not a smoker, no diabetes, no family history, and no heart issues, which was confirmed after the stroke because I wore a heart monitor for 2 weeks. So, in fact, as my friends told me since, if you'd asked them to list everyone they knew and then rank their likelihood of having a stroke from highest to lowest, I'd be near or at the very bottom. So it could not have been more of a shock, more out of the blue event when it happened.
You know, I hear so many stories of that, of people who were living a very healthy lifestyle, no things that would appear to make you likely to have a stroke, and then it happens. Mm-hmm. I like what you say about extreme gardening. I really like that idea. I got into gardening for a while when in a previous apartment because we were spending like $5 on fresh basil at the supermarket, and I thought I can grow it for cheaper than that, and that promptly led to about $1,000 investment in various gardening equipment. So that plan didn't really work out so well, but at one point I had enough grow lights that I think you could see my apartment from like blocks away, and I was probably the only person in Seattle at that time using grow lights to grow herbs instead of to grow
instead of the other herb. Yes.
So you're living this healthy lifestyle, and
then we decided to go on a trip. A few years ago, we bought a small camper trailer, 100% solar powered. Basically, it's a teardrop that's 6 foot high, so you can stand up in it. And it weighs 950 pounds empty, so you can pull it with almost any car.
Wow.
It's tiny, but, we're former tent campers and backpackers, and we just wanted to get off the ground, basically.
Yeah, so this is luxurious.
So, yeah, but it's tiny. And, people see it and they can't imagine ever traveling in it because it's so small. But we took it on several shakedown cruises. We took it up to Canada. We took it down to Georgia. And, we decided that we could live in this on the road for a long time.
And you were based in New Jersey at the time.
I'm still in New Jersey. And we always wanted to go to Alaska. That was a bucket list trip, and really spend a couple months there to do it right. And we figured that the trip, driving there, driving back, and, taking our time would take 6 months or so. Clearly, this was something we were planning to do in retirement. Mm-hmm. And my husband retired a few years ago. And when the pandemic hit, I retired. I was one of those boomers who took retirement a couple of years before I had originally planned. And so we said, well, this is a good time to go. I mean, no time like the present. So we spent months planning this trip. We thought we had everything covered: routes, campgrounds, reservations, places to boondock. We bought a satellite device locator in case we got lost in the backcountry, portable solar panels. We had head-to-toe bug suit. We had waterproof hats, pants, and jackets. We had full-size spare tires and even extra wheels for the trailer. And so 5-6 months of planning for this 6-month trip. And we had planned to drive to Alaska, but the Canadian border remained closed. And so we could either postpone our trip for a year or pay a lot of money and take the ferry from Bellingham, Washington to Anchorage, which, after a lot of back and forth, you only live once kind of discussions, we decided to go for it. And we booked our ferry for July 24th in Bellingham and gave ourselves 4 weeks to cross the country. And we were almost there when the stroke happened.
So to give some folks from outside the U.S. a little bit of perspective of what we're talking about here, New Jersey is in the upper right of the United States, the Northeast. Bellingham, Washington is about an hour and a half north of Seattle in the upper left of the U.S., so in the very northwest of the U.S. So we're talking about driving across 2,500 to 3,000 miles from Jersey to Bellingham, and then getting everything on a boat to head up to Alaska in the very, very north.
Yes. Well, much further north. I think a lot of the maps you see in school don't give you a realistic picture of how far north it is. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. And, we found ourselves fleeing wildfires. Our route kept changing because, we were encountering severe weather events the entire 6 months, basically. But July 19th, so 5 days before our ferry took off, before our ferry reservation, we set up camp at Deception Pass State Park.
Oh, it's gorgeous out there.
It was beautiful. And, it was early afternoon, and we were going to grab a quick lunch before heading off on a hike. And all of a sudden, I started feeling dizzy. And I thought it was because I was tired or hadn't eaten lunch. So we grabbed some lunch, but afterwards the dizziness got worse. And then I started getting a slight sense of nausea as well. I went to lie down on the bed in the trailer, but the nausea kept getting worse. And then suddenly I noticed a tingling feeling on my right side. From my fingers to my toes. It was only on my right side, and it was only a tingling, kind of like when your arm or leg falls asleep and you have to shake it awake. For some reason, I immediately thought of stroke, and maybe because I felt it only on one side. And I told my husband, I said, I really think I'm having a stroke. And we were both incredulous. And, I told him I think I need to go to an urgent care center. There was no service in the campground. We got in the car, started driving towards the main road. And the whole time I was Googling stroke symptoms and what to do if you think you're having a stroke. So, I can text, I can talk, I had no weakness. I just had this tingling sensation and my nausea was getting worse. So anyway, the advice is to call 911, which we did. As it turned out, there was a firehouse right next to the main road, and we pulled into the parking lot and waited for help, which came almost immediately because there was an EMT at the firehouse. So he came over, he evaluated me, took my blood pressure, looked in my eyes, made me touch my nose, stick out my tongue, and basically said, no, you're not having a stroke. So at that point, my nausea had gotten worse and I felt the need to vomit. And he gave me a bag and said, you probably have food poisoning because we've had high temperatures here and there's pink tide and maybe you have food poisoning. I knew I didn't have food poisoning because I'd had that before and this was a different feeling.
Yeah, it's a feeling you don't forget.
You don't forget, right. And also food poisoning is at both ends, and this was vomiting only. So an ambulance showed up, and the paramedic came out and basically repeated the evaluation. And this is the evaluation that I had repeatedly by nurses and doctors until I was discharged. And I'm sure that every stroke patient has it. You have to touch all your fingers. You have to stick out your tongue. You have to smile. I mean, I know they're looking for asymmetry, but he evaluated me and also proclaimed, don't worry, you're not having a stroke. Now, by that time, I had filled up 2 vomit bags. And because of this, the paramedic suggested that, I go get checked out at a local hospital. And he suggested that my husband drive because I was stable. According to him, I wasn't having a stroke. And the ambulance ride would cost thousands of dollars. So my husband drove to the nearest hospital, a small regional hospital on the peninsula. I was able to walk in on my own power. So I had no weakness, no paralysis, no loss of balance. My only symptoms were tingling, dizziness, and this relentless vomiting that were just contractions at this point because I had nothing left to throw up. It was just constant painful contractions.
It's like you look in the bucket and it's like, oh, is this a kidney?
Yeah. And that went on for hours. It went on for hours. I waited in the waiting room for a while, and then they took me for a CAT scan and an MRI, both of which were inconclusive, they told me. So even though I kept saying that I really think I'm having a stroke, the nurses, the doctors were telling me they didn't think so, that my symptoms were not stroke symptoms, that the scans were inconclusive, that they believed it was an inner ear problem or maybe vertigo. And all I remember was just begging for something to make the vomiting stop. They gave me Zofran through an IV, but it did nothing. So bigger and bigger doses of Zofran did nothing. Basically, that feeling lasted for several hours. At one point, I was asked to talk to a neurologist on a Zoom call on a computer monitor they brought to my gurney. And she told me that there was this drug, but the first thing she wanted to tell me was that it was extremely dangerous and could cause brain bleeding or death, especially if you're not having a stroke and we don't know that you are having a stroke. Asked me if I wanted it. And this is the first time we'd heard that there was a drug, which, now I know she was referring to TPA. But very definitely, seemed to imply that she would not recommend it for somebody who maybe wasn't even having a stroke, but certainly someone who had no paralysis, no weakness, no confusion, And the scans were inconclusive.
A little bit of progress we've made here, at least with, the EMTs and the paramedics, they were saying, nope, this is not a stroke. The hospital was saying, maybe, probably not, but maybe.
Right. They weren't sure, and they said that this drug would do more harm than good if I wasn't having one. And right now, my symptoms weren't that bad, which they weren't, but they kept me overnight. Finally, it was Ativan. I don't know how big a dose of Ativan that stopped the vomiting. At some point in the night, I woke up and noticed that I couldn't move my right arm or leg. But I was so tired. It was like a dream, and I fell back asleep. And then when I woke up the next morning, I realized it wasn't a dream. I was completely paralyzed on my right side from the shoulders down. And when the doctor came in and saw this, the look on his face, I describe it now as kind of an oh expression, kind of like, she had a stroke. And he rushed me to another MRI, which this time showed that I had an ischemic stroke in the medulla oblongata, or in the brainstem. And I remember asking, why didn't you see it in the scans the day before? And he explained something to me about the evolution of a stroke. So basically, my clot traveled over a period of several hours before finally blocking blood flow to my right side. And because, none of the medical professionals recognized my symptoms as those of stroke, even though I kept telling them I thought I was having a stroke, I wasn't given treatment that could have possibly prevented the paralysis. Had the EMT or the paramedic been educated to recognize my symptoms as possible stroke symptoms, I could have been taken by ambulance to a specialized cardiovascular unit in Seattle, which was only about 90 minutes away, and had proper treatment. People keep telling me how fortunate it was that we were in, quote, civilization and not in some backcountry town when the stroke occurred. But, now when I think about it, I don't think the outcome would have been that different, because my stroke was allowed to evolve basically without any proper medical intervention.
And by the time you wake up the next morning, it's too late for TPA.
It's too late, right. It's been more than 4 hours. I think they have like 4 hours is the 4.5 hours.
That's incredible. That's one of those other things, too, that I think a lot of folks don't realize is they think that when you have a stroke, it's instant. It happens all at once. And it's not like that. Those brain cells that may be blocked, blood may be blocked to those brain cells, may only be partially blocked, that blood flow, or even once it is blocked and once those brain cells start dying off, they don't die instantly, just like the rest of our body. It can take us weeks to starve. Obviously, brain cells can't go that long, but it's the same type of thing where it takes some time for them to die off, and that's where treatment options happen, and that's why this stuff can progress over time. Unfortunately, in your case, they weren't able to respond quickly enough. And especially with brainstem strokes, those things that is functioning at such a basic low. When I say low level, I don't mean like minor. I mean fundamental core functioning of the body, that it's just not what we often see elsewhere.
Well, I know, because the doctors were telling me how incredibly lucky I was. I mean, these brainstem, the stroke didn't affect my speech or my ability to swallow or my thinking ability. Because as I learned later, they said, a brainstem stroke, that can lead to loss of swallowing. So you need a feeding tube, or it can even lead to locked-in syndrome. So you're really lucky that you had a massive brainstem stroke and it only left you paralyzed on the right side of your body. So, those first days in the hospital were very dark. Because 2 days earlier, I'd completed a challenging 6-mile hike in the Cascades, and now I couldn't move a muscle on my right side. I couldn't even sit up. I mean, you don't think about it, but you need your core muscles to sit. And the core muscles on the right side of my body were not functioning, so I just kept flopping over to my right. It's like trying to get a month-old baby to sit up. They'll just flop over. You know? And, you know, being always an independent person, it now took 2 nurses to hoist me onto a commode. I mean, they would tie a gate belt around my waist. I'm sure I don't know if you remember those. They're like a seat belt.
Oh, sure. I still have it hanging on the back of my door as a reminder.
I've kept mine too. And getting the bathroom was only a few feet away, but getting there was, you know, I might as well have climbed Mount Everest. I mean, it was an impossible feat. You know, I couldn't move my right hand, and I'm right-handed. My right fist was clenched, and when I tried to pry the fingers open with my left hand, they would just curl back up. You know, and it was very dark because the doctors will always say that every stroke is different. They don't know how much function will return. So, you know, sitting up in a wheelchair, using a walker, those were goals that I had to work toward. Those were goals to be achieved.
So I was going to say, so did they figure out what caused your stroke?
No, they never did. It's in the record, it says of unknown cause. I had some theories that they, you know, didn't really take seriously, but I feel, I mean, since then, I've done some reading, some research, some talking to people, and I feel that it was stress. Not, you know, everybody has stress. Everybody has stress. It's the way that my body and I respond to stress. I'm a ruminator, which is somebody who goes back and chews over stuff that happened 20 years ago that can't do a thing about, but you still worry about it. The cortisol is poisonous, and cortisol levels build up. And it's not something like they can measure your cholesterol level and tell you need to go on drugs to lower your cholesterol. But stress levels build up and then they go down, and there's really nothing they can do about it. So right. I've, you know, I'm reading books on meditation. I'm keeping busy with projects. I was told ruminators need projects. And I'm trying to practice that mantra, let that shit go.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
You know, the doctors didn't really give that a lot of weight, but I have found that doctors, an atypical case like mine, where the vast majority of strokes can be explained by one of the risk factors. They're so busy. They tend to live in their silos, and they don't really have time. It's like, okay, it just happened. These things happen. Move on. I think there are probably more cases of stroke occurring with people with no risk factors than we know.
And I think we're now starting to see some more of that research come out as folks are starting to look into it. There's been some interesting things happening in looking at stress responses and things like that. And cortisol is one of those things where it's great because it can save your life in a crisis and then go away. But if it stays there all the time and you're in that constant stress level, like we've all been for the last 2-3 years,
yes,
and ramping up, especially this week, is that it really starts doing damage. It's like even when you're driving your car, you've got that red zone, that peak where the engine is working really hard. And if you need to suddenly accelerate very quickly to get around a hazard, great, you can do that. But if you keep driving that way, you're going to burn out your engine. And that's what cortisol is doing in the human body.
Well, a lot of people were telling me that, well, why did it happen when you were finally on vacation, three weeks into your 6-month trip? I have a good friend who's a PhD psychologist in California and was a hostage negotiator and on a SWAT team. And he was the first person who really made sense of my stroke. He says, of course it happened after you were relaxed, because ruminators need constant distractions. They need constant projects. And when that ends and now you're on a long hike with, you know, no projects but time to think, you're on a long car ride with time to think, that's when it happens. And he says he sees that a lot with first responders or, retired law enforcement, people who have very stressful lives. Once that stops, that's when they have a cardiovascular event. So I don't know. I mean, it made sense to me. It was the first person I talked to who made sense of my stroke. I woke up in the hospital on July 20th, and our ferry reservation was the 24th. So obviously we had to cancel, which was a huge disappointment because here we were 3.5 weeks into a 6-month trip, and it seemed that it was suddenly over. Our kids and friends were talking about how they could bring us back home. It's like everything changed in a day. Then the second day in the hospital, I mean, these days I look back now and it was only a couple days, but at the time that you're going through this, it's an eternity. The second day in the hospital, I was able to move my foot the tiniest bit, just the tiniest bit. And, the same with the fingers on my right hand. I could unclench them maybe an inch or two before they fell back into a fist. And these tiny signs made the nurses and doctors and the physical therapist and occupational therapist there at the hospital very optimistic. To them, these were signs that function was returning and that, an acute rehab facility could help me regain more function. And they started looking for a bed. Fortunately, one opened up in Swedish in Seattle. The acute rehab facility at Swedish in Seattle, which we have in common.
Absolutely. Folks in the past have heard me talk about moving up to floor 6, and that is the acute rehab facility at Swedish Cherry Hill, that 6th floor there.
Yes. So I know that, I spent almost 3 weeks there. I know that you become very familiar with that place. When I got there, I couldn't even sit straight up in a wheelchair. I had to have the gait belt. I would hold the wheelchair with my left hand, pivot on my left leg, and plop into it to get in, and I'd reverse it to get out. And that was the extent of my abilities when I arrived there. And basically, they taught me to walk again. That was my goal. They asked, what is your goal while you're here? And my goal was to walk out on my own power and use the bathroom independently. Those were my 2 goals, which at that time were huge. In the beginning, walking out had various options. Would I need an ankle brace to keep my ankle from rolling? Would I need a walker or a quad cane? Those were definitely options in the beginning. I was determined. I had so much determination. I was determined not just to have my old life back, with minimum accommodations, but also to continue our trip to Alaska because I didn't want to go back home. I wanted to continue our trip to Alaska. We actually went ahead and rebooked the ferry for mid-August, and that was a real motivator and goal for me. I worked bloody hard, exercised with TheraBands, Theraputty in my room. I practiced writing, typing, coloring. I got into paint by stickers thanks to the occupational therapist there. And the therapist kept telling me it's all about the reps. All about the reps. It's not even about the exercises and the form in there. It's about the reps. Get out and walk. Move, bend your hands, practice writing, practice typing, just reps.
One of the things that's really interesting that I noticed back there, I know they've since added some more equipment there, including they have a fancy functional e-stim bike in the rehab facility. I talked to the CEO and product planner from that company a couple years ago, but ultimately there's relatively, I mean, you see on TV rehab facilities and they have all sorts of fancy gear, but a lot of it's not fancy gear. It's you and a therapist and a mat table working on reps and doing it again and again.
That's what they just kept saying. And, no one at Swedish, not a single therapist or doctor said, you're crazy. You just had a stroke. You can't go on this road trip to Alaska. And, I'm very grateful for that. And I attribute it, right or wrong, to, a different mentality in the West, because kind of more of an outdoors, adventurous spirit, maybe. I mean, I wonder if I'd had the stroke back home in New Jersey, if the doctors would have had a similar attitude. But nobody there tried to tell me that can't do it. In fact, they were like, this is great because you'll be motivated to get out and walk, and walking is what you need to do. During my time in rehab, though, in the PT gym there where they have that bike, and, they have the posters for identifying stroke risk. So I spent hours staring at the acronym FAST, F-A-S-T, or BFAST, none of which described the symptoms that I had. Not one of the symptoms I had was listed on there, and yet here I was in the acute rehab facility relearning how to walk because I'd had a stroke. So where was the nausea and vomiting? Where was the tingling? I mean, I couldn't wrap my head around that. And even at the end, when I was discharged, the nurse came to read me the risk factors for a stroke, and I just wanted to grab her and yell, these aren't my symptoms, but I had a stroke. So I feel like there's a huge disconnect there.
Yeah, there definitely is. I think I think even today the American Heart Association still officially recommends FAST as opposed to BFAST, simply because I believe the theory is that it's easier for people to remember that, and they'll at least remember that. I personally am a big fan of BFAST as a starting point, but it is just a starting point. It is by no means an exclusive list of symptoms. So when folks need to know symptoms, yes, you need to remember BFAST, or you need to remember the Spanish equivalent, ahora.
Because they also list headache, severe headache, and confusion. That was nowhere do you see intense vomiting. And if you think about it, the brainstem controls vomiting. So a stroke in the brain stem would produce that kind of symptom.
So as you're going through this, and as you're talking to them about your plan to go continue this adventure, how was your plan for leaving the hospital, and how involved was the hospital in helping you build that plan?
Yeah, the PTs wanted to see the camper, and I think that they envisioned some big RV that you needed a ladder to climb into. And when my husband pulled it, by our Subaru in front of the hospital, they were relieved. It's impossible to fall out of that bed because the whole camper is the bed. And they did ask me to buy a folding bath chair for when I used accessible showers in campgrounds. And for a while, we talked about telemedicine for outpatient, because normally you would go, and they admitted that. They said normally we release people to their homes and they continue with outpatient rehab, and maybe the homes are modified, whereas we're releasing you to a camper. We tried outpatient. It was going to be telemedicine. However, we ran into licensing issues. For example, a PT in Washington can't treat a patient in Alaska or on the road because the same licensing issues apply. And they ask you, are you in the state of Washington?
Right.
And, I would say yes. But if I wasn't, then they couldn't get that telemedicine. So they were very, supportive. And basically they told me, the OTs and the PTs gave me a whole list of exercises, but they said, the best thing you can do is walk, walk, walk. And towards the end, I had the gait belt on and I walked around the campus. I would walk around the campus and they would take me over rocks, past bushes, set up obstacle courses outside. And of course, I had no stamina. I mean, you don't have any stamina after this happens. And it was exhausting, but they said just get out and walk. And I really felt that, those guys at Swedish, they're heroes. I mean, that's kind of the best PTs and OTs, I think, that anyone can find. And so they basically gave me all the tools I needed to continue on my own. And I had the motivation. We had a couple months in Alaska and then the rest of our trip. So I basically did rehab on the road.
I think you said something really important there, is that they are amazing. And, Olivia and Emily, who I think were no longer at Swedish by the time you were there. And
Emily was there.
Oh, Emily was still there.
Emily was the one who actually introduced me to your podcast.
Oh, awesome. Emily was fantastic. She's in the Carolinas now.
Wow.
Yeah. And Megan, who is my PT, I think she is still doing PT there. No, Emily was great. By the way, one of my favorite stories about Emily was we were in a session and we were doing basically snow angels on the mat table, and she was sitting on the rolling stool, and suddenly I had just a little bit of connection in my arm. My left arm started to come back on, and I ended up moving it quickly in a burst, and I nearly pulled her off the chair. She almost fell on the floor, and that was like the highlight of her week. But such a great group. Like you said, they can give you the tools, but ultimately it's up to you to use those tools and as part of your recovery. And
again, I mean, and they would tell you the same, that I was really, really determined. I worked really hard. It helped that I was fit before, that I didn't have underlying conditions, and that I was relatively on the young side. I mean, I was 63 at the time, which I'm 64 now, which is not young. Certainly my kids don't think it's young, but it's relatively young for a stroke, because there were people in their 80s and who had underlying conditions. The fact that I was fit, was a hiker, helped me to work back, basically get my life back.
So, I mean, after all that, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. In the 5 months that we spent on the road after we left, I've improved a lot. My stamina went from, after we left the hospital, for example, we drove out to Mount Rainier, and my husband parked kind of in the parking lot there, and there was the visitor center. And I remember just going to the visitor center was exhausting. And, and then 6 weeks in Alaska and the rest of the road trip, I just kept walking more and building up from half a mile to 1 mile, 1 mile to 2 miles, 2 miles to 4 miles. And the trails some of them were challenging, uphill, rocky. There were a lot of obstacles. And, it was the best training, the best rehab. And today I feel like hiking saved my life. It really saved my life. And today I can go 8 miles on a challenging trail at altitude, which when I think back to those days in the hospital, it's a miracle. It's really a miracle. And, our friends and our kids never saw me in the hospital, never saw me that way, because we were 3,000 miles away from home. And because my face and my voice was not affected, they only talked to me on the phone. And so it's like, what stroke? I mean, for them, it's hard to imagine. I mean, they didn't see it. And in some ways, I think that's good. But sometimes I look at my husband, I think, did that really happen? Mm. I do still have a tingling and a stiffness on my right side that the doctors say could take months or years. They have no idea if it'll ever go away or how long it will take. I still occasionally will have some dizziness, but I've learned to, compensate. And I would say that, I'm back 98, 99%. It was through a lot of persistence and hard work.
Right. That's incredible for that to happen so quickly. What I think is also great is that the doctors are saying, yeah, it might take a while. It might come back or it might not. We don't know. Whereas 10 years ago, they would have been saying, if it's not back in 12 months, it's not coming back. So I think that is huge progress in the field. So when you're out now, especially in those early days, hiking and exploring the wilderness, I mean, how does it differ as going out as a stroke survivor versus beforehand?
Andy, one of the PTs, said something very wise. He said, okay, with you had a stroke, so you're learning this, but all of us are going to lose our ability to function or walk with confidence and develop the risk of falling. So you should always know where your foot's going to land, where you can rest, how you're going to break that fall. And all my life, I was kind of careless about that. I didn't have to think about it. I would run up the stairs, run down the stairs carrying stuff willy-nilly. And now I find I always know where my foot's going to land. I never go down the stairs without holding on. Even though if I feel confident doing it, I still don't. Always in the bathroom, I take a little longer to make sure that I'm not going to slip. And on hikes, I almost always wear traction cleats or crampons, not just on ice and snow, but it helps on gravel. It helps on any kind of loose dirt, whereas before I could, run down a path. Maybe I could do it now, but I'm aware of the risk of falling. And I use trekking poles. Initially, I used the trekking poles to steady me. Now I use Nordic walking poles. I had the collapsible trekking poles, but a couple times they actually collapsed on me going downhill, which is not good.
Right.
So now I use the ones that don't collapse. They're single piece. And they have the added benefit of giving you an upper body workout as well as stabilizing you. So I think I use that gear. And it looks cool. It looks like I'm a serious hiker.
It doesn't look out of place at all out there in the wilderness. I actually know somebody who uses those trekking poles as an alternative to a cane.
Right.
In part because, well, I know some people who've done it because they feel a stigma around a cane, which I don't, but everybody has different reactions to this stuff. But he is also just extremely tall. And that was the best way to get a mobility device that would accommodate his height.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're great for substitutes for a cane, and I definitely used that in the beginning. But I feel like now it's more, I can use it now more, the trekking poles, for their intended purpose.
Do you encounter many other survivors then out doing hiking and doing the outdoor activities and getting out for those adventures?
Once something like that happens to you, you start noticing people with different abilities out there. And I definitely noticed that more on the trail. It's not like you go up to someone and say, hey, did you have a stroke? Because I had a stroke.
I see that bend in your elbow. That looks very familiar to me.
Well, that was another thing that they worked on, because in the beginning, my right hand, I kind of had it bent. And they said, no, you have to tuck it in your pocket, or you can't have that. And, so I did work on that as well. And it really helped that I'm right-handed, because I think it gave me the motivation to work on my hand. If it had been my left side and I'm right-handed, I think I might have just let it go and continued compensating with my right hand. So in the end, kind of forced me to work harder on my right side. You definitely notice people, whether they have arthritis, whether they're stroke survivors, whether they've had joint replacements, whether they have some chronic condition. I definitely notice more people out on the trail. Not so much, in the past couple months, I've had the confidence to go and do more challenging trails. But in the beginning, when I was staying on the easier trails, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And in the past couple of months, too, it's also been winter.
Out here, yes. But, that used to stop me, but not anymore. It's like they say here, and they say in like Rochester, New York, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. It's like, well, I don't know that I totally agree with that. A couple of weeks ago, we went on the Appalachian Trail here, and it was 20-some degrees, and the path was iced, and I had ice crampons, and we went. When I'm not out there walking, when I'm not moving, I feel more strokey, and that's a term that, I don't, my people ask, what do you mean more strokey? I feel the stiffness more, I feel the tingling more. And I feel kind of dizziness more. But when I'm moving, it goes away. And when I walk a lot, I don't feel it as much. Do you find the same thing when you...
Yeah, if I slow down or if I start to get tired, those things just start to come back just a little bit more. The arm gets stiffer, the leg, my gait involves more legs swinging out and things like that. And I can just notice it more. It's like the symptoms sort of ebb and flow in terms of intensity, but a lot of time, for the most part, it's impacting less and less. But every now and then, I'll just have a day where I'm just having that where it feels like where I was 6 months earlier.
So that does happen, because sometimes I feel like I've had a regression, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I walked past that point. How can it be now, going back to where it was? And it does. I mean, it's not a linear progression. I mean, it's all about building new pathways and neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm. And the more we do those, the more repetitions, the more we are walking that trail in the woods and packing down that dirt and clearing more space and just building. Every step along the path makes the path easier for somebody else to follow.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the path in the woods, and I mean, with hiking, I feel too that there's the added benefit when you go out and walk in the woods or hike, as opposed to, walking on the asphalt round and round your block, is that you're, as the Japanese call it, forest bathing, where you get out there and you feel spiritually and emotionally renewed by nature, and it has a calming effect. So I feel like there's the double bonus of being out in nature and moving and exercising. And, when you're on a trail, it's not straight. There are obstacles. You are using different sets of muscles. You do have to maneuver in ways that you don't when you're walking down the hallways at Swedish or even walking around the campus there. So I feel like that was the best rehab I could have had, the 5 months of rehab on the road trip. So
absolutely. So I mean, when you tell people now about those symptoms that you had, what's most people's reaction?
They say that they never heard of those as stroke symptoms. And after the stroke happened, my husband was in communication with friends and family. And I think they were scared to call me because they thought they didn't know what they'd find. And when we did finally talk, their reaction, almost every single one, was, wow, you sound normal. You're not slurring, because I didn't have aphasia, fortunately. When I FaceTimed my kids, they were like, your face isn't droopy. They all thought that, did you have a terrible headache? Did you fall down? It's like, I didn't have any of those symptoms. And when I tell them, they're very surprised. When I think back that all of these medical professionals told me point blank, you're not having a stroke, there's something not right there. Because I was in, quote, civilization. I mean, I was in Northwest Washington, with medical facilities. And I feel like they should know. They should know to recognize those. Because even if they were wrong and it was an inner ear issue, it's better to err on the side of caution and this is a stroke. And I thought, I know these are atypical symptoms, but I'm not the only one. This has got to have happened to other people, and maybe they weren't as lucky. Maybe they did end up locked in. Maybe they did end up with a feeding tube, or maybe they died. Because, the bottom line is I had what they call a massive brain stem stroke. Everyone I talked to in that first day did not recognize it as such. And when I think about that, that's kind of scary to me. And I think that needs to change. I think, what I want to do is increase awareness of these symptoms. And as you say, they tend to be more common in women than in men. And there's a history of women's symptoms being kind of overlooked or not given as much attention as symptoms experienced by men.
Absolutely. This is it's a very big deal to be aware of. The gender disparities in symptoms, the gender disparities in the way medical professionals sometimes listen to women and to people of color. And all of these are things we absolutely need to be talking about and talking about loudly so that everybody can get the care that they need and that they deserve, which is going to just benefit everybody. I mean, last month I had Jasmine Lowe on the show as well, and her symptoms primarily manifested also through nausea and vomiting in the middle of a company meeting where they passed her a bucket and went on with the meeting. Swapped out the bucket at one point too. Just amazing. So I mean, this stuff happens, and it's something that folks need to know about. And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. Modus Nova makes the Modus Hand, Modus Foot, and the software platform that powers them. The Modus Hand is an AI-controlled, air-powered robotic exoskeleton that I wear on my affected arm as I play video games in the Modus system. The goal is for me to improve my hand control, starting with wrist extension and flexion, bending my wrist up and down. That up and down motion controls actions in the Modus video games. The device senses my movement or my attempt at movement, and it either helps me or hinders my motion to give me the best workout possible for my hand. It also helps me get in the thousands of repetitions I need to recover the use of an affected limb. And of course, we know that the most important thing for recovery is getting those repetitions in. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
Get out and move. I mean, that's what saved me. What saved me was getting out, walking, exercising. And again, what I do now that I never did before was have the traction cleats. So just by doing that, it's given me more confidence to go out there and be able to move. And I have a mat in the bathtub, which for the first time in my life, I mean, these ordinary things that, you just take for granted. You take for granted that you can just walk to the bathroom and do all of these things by yourself. And then one day it's taken away. And looking back, I feel very fortunate that I was able to work my way back, because there are some injuries where you don't work your way back from that. So I feel very, very lucky in an unlucky situation, if you know what I mean.
Sure. So, I mean, related to that then, Ultimately, was your stroke a blessing or a curse?
In many ways, I feel stronger today than I felt before. I gave up alcohol because just that dizzy, nauseous feeling, I never want to feel that again. And, even having a little alcoholic buzz is no longer attractive. So, and I was a Guinness drinker, and I liked, a couple Guinnesses or maybe a Moscow Mule at the end of the day. And giving up the alcohol and hiking, I left 20 pounds on the trail, which is a lot when you get to be, over 60. I worry about it happening again. And because they couldn't tell me, it's not like, oh, I can go on this medication now and reduce my risk. They don't know why it happened. The doctors said, once you have a stroke, you have a 25% chance of having another stroke. And I've decided to accept that so I have a 75% chance of never having another stroke. It definitely changes you because it is a life or death experience.
Brings a lot of things into clarity and focus.
Mm-hmm. And I find that I have a deeper appreciation. I have more of a sense of, time running out. We're both retired now, and there's a lot of, the whole culture tries to tell you that you never have enough money to retire. And I feel like now I'm more anxious about running out of time than out of money, after that experience. So do I wish it, it never happened? Maybe. Like I said to you, we're all now, members of this exclusive club that none of us really wanted to join. But I feel very fortunate, very lucky that I was able to come back. If I were still lying with and paralyzed on my right side, I would feel very differently about it because that's not how I wanted to live.
Olga, this has been fantastic. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
You can always email me and at Olga Wright Stroke Story, and that's OLGAWRIGHT Stroke Story, all one word, at gmail.com. And, if you have a story to share or an idea on how I can, get this information out there, whether through, writing to various organizations or going to speak to groups, because that's my goal. I really want. I want EMT, I want first responders as well as nurses and doctors to know that these are real stroke symptoms, even though they're atypical. And I fully believe that if, I had encountered people that were educated to that fact, I would have been able to get treatment that would have busted my clot before it caused the paralysis.
Well, awesome. So definitely reach out to Olga if you have some of those opportunities, and we'll include that email in the show notes over at strokecast.com/Olga. Olga, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been great.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the opportunity and the conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Now let's talk for a minute about sponsor Like Minded. One of the most powerful things to find in post-stroke life is a community, and a community of people who get it. That's one of the things that membership in the nonprofit Like Minded program brings, a connection with survivors, therapists, and doctors. Members can join webinars on topics ranging from hand therapy to telling their story. Or if you miss a session, that's fine because members have access to recordings of all those sessions. Plus, members get access to a private text messaging group for even more answers and support. So get the support you need and deserve to live your best post-stroke life. To find out if Like-Minded is right for you, visit strokecast.com/like-minded. Use promo code STROKECAST to save 20% off your first month. One thing I really enjoyed about this episode was that Olga did her rehab at the same place I did mine, and she had a great experience with the team of therapists at Swedish Cherry Hill. The thing that makes a really good therapy program isn't the fancy equipment. It's the people there, the ones who work with patients and the people who train the people that work with patients. And Swedish has a lot of great people. It's why I'm still in touch with many of them, even when they've gone on to other adventures. Of course, the frustrating takeaway from Olga's story is that she did everything right and things still went wrong. Olga lived a lifestyle that put her at extremely low risk for stroke, but stroke still happened to her. She did the right thing and called 911 when she had her stroke. She could have gotten treatment, but the medical professionals dismissed her story until it was too late. So, does that mean that all the work Olga did over the years was a waste? She lived healthily, but she still had a stroke, so what was the point? Well, Olga's healthy lifestyle is why she was able to recover as well and as quickly as she did in her 60s. It's why she could continue her 24,000-mile road trip and why she could continue to hike in the woods less than a year after her stroke. It's why she's able to live the life she wants today. Maintaining good health to begin with gave Olga a springboard for her recovery. The other piece I want to emphasize is that while Be Fast, balance eyes, face, arms, speech, time to call an ambulance, is a great starting point for recognizing a stroke, the story we heard from Olga today and from Jazz Lowe a couple of months ago, those stories are important reminders that it's not a comprehensive diagnostic tool. It won't catch every stroke, especially with women. But it's a start. On a related note, the question of getting sick or having a cardiovascular event when you go on vacation is also something I find really interesting. When I used to take vacation for several weeks from work, I was suddenly more likely to get sick, a cold or a bug or something like that. I used to joke that when I was working with a super busy schedule, I didn't have time for an illness to take hold. So I would just joke about my immune system scheduling those conditions for a less busy time and just telling those viruses to go put some time on my calendar when I'm not in the office. I suppose when I went on vacation, my immune system did too, and then I would collapse. Perhaps not as dramatically as an Olympic cross-country marathon skier the moment they cross the finish line, but still. And now when I think back on it, it was the Christmas season of 2015 when I finally discovered I had the high blood pressure that would likely cause my stroke. I had come off a very busy work year and was vacationing at my mother's house across the country. That week was when I started to get nosebleeds every other day that would release significant quantities over the course of 30 minutes. It's like those blood vessels finally began to surrender after a year of grueling effort to contain blood pumping at 200/160. The immediate threat or pressure of life was relieved so that the body could now stop expending survival-level energy trying to hold things together. I guess one of the lessons there is that when things slow down, you can let some of your guard down, but the things you've managed to delay dealing with are about to now come to the front of the line. For links to Olga's email, Deception Pass, and my conversations with Emily and other Swedish folks, be sure to visit strokecast.com/Olga. Share Olga's story with someone you know, especially medical first responders, by giving them the link strokecast.com/Olga. Subscribe to the Strokecast newsletter for updates from prior guests by visiting strokecast.com/news. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.